It's 10:30 on 550 KTSA. Our gang is assembled. Big stories of the day and the week. That's what we talk about on Gang of Four. And I think for San Antonio, this is the big story of the week. The mayor's pre-K for SA proposal. Councilman Saldana, unanimous approval yesterday to go to the ballot in November. What was going through your mind as you were listening to the mayor lay out this case?
Well, you know, as the mayor was talking about, we've gone over for about a month and a half, but it was really telling yesterday that the entire council was packed. And I think anytime you get people in the council chambers who are coming in to talk either for or against it, you know that you've got a dicey issue. And in this case, I think we had a pretty bold decision on our hands. And anytime you do something different, I think you ruffle some feathers, but at the same time means that you're going to be doing something that you're a little skittish about because you're going into uncharted territories. But as we were going through it, you know, we saw two different versions of it. The first draft, I think, left something to be desired for a lot of council members, and we came back with a lot, I think, of good quality controls on professional development, the amount of students who are eligible, and you know, I was pretty pleased because I think this sends a huge message for the city and where our priorities are, because it's very clear that if anybody looks at San Antonio, it wouldn't rank us at the top in terms of how well we educate our residents. So I think it's a huge step. Like I said, it packs the house because it's a huge step that isn't a skittish, you know, we're going to timidly approach a complex issue by doing a half-hearted solution. This is us saying we're all in and we want the school districts to help us out and we want the residents to make a choice on this. And I think they have to study it over the next few months.
Is that going to be the attitude at school districts? We are going to help the city educate children? Aren't school districts going to say, it's our business to do this. It's our business to make these decisions.
Well, no doubt. No, nobody's taking away the fact that that is their business, and that what you'll ask them then is that, do you feel like you've got all the resources and all the help you need to get those things done? And they'll say, we rely a lot on agencies like Communities in Schools that do dropout prevention. They do vocational instruction, in some cases that the city funds through the Alamo Academy. So it's not as if this isn't one of those cases where everybody can put their hands in the middle and help out, and I think they're welcome, especially with, as the mayor said, in 2011, they saw a drastic cut in some of those resources. So, especially with respect to quality professional development, which is, to be honest, one of the first things that when budget crunches happen to schools, that's one of the first things they do. It's, do you lose professional development courses for your teachers, or do you lose a teacher? And that's an easy decision for a principal.
You know, the mayor and the city and all of us in our community should be applauded for what we do with what you mentioned about the Alamo Academies. Now, here's a program that's measurable, that works, that you can take a look at it and say, yes, this works. And I'm talking specifically about the partnership that's been created with the Port of San Antonio and the huge aerospace employers out there, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Gore, all of these wonderful, huge companies that have these well-paying, high-tech jobs where in the city and in our region, actually, high school students start as sophomores and they begin taking college courses through the Alamo Academies, and by the time they graduate high school, they have 30 hours of college. They have an internship with one of these fantastic companies, and you can measure it. You can show how these students go from one step to the next, and by the time they're either on to college to finish to get their bachelor's degree, or they stay and they become line workers and managers and maybe presidents of the company, it works. And it works very well, and it impacts positively a number, hundreds and hundreds of students, and it really works. My only question is, this sounds like it's got a chance to work, but I just wonder if it's going to, because we talk about Head Start, and I just learned the other day that the federal government has done an extensive study of whether or not Head Start works, and through their own studies, they show that the students that take Head Start, that go through Head Start, really have no appreciable gain over the ones that have not. And so I love this idea, but I wonder, is it going to work? I mean, this was like a slap in the face to me just a couple of days ago, this wonderful program we called Head Start. Does it really work? The federal government says it really doesn't.
Well, and the other thing that I wonder about is, and so many of our callers this week have brought this up, is that many of us are old enough to remember when there was no pre-K. Mm-hmm. Some people even remember when there was no K. Mm-hmm. And you can't deny that the most influential factor in how prepared and enthusiastic a young child is for learning is what happens in the home. So no government program is going to create that valuing of education, that cultural emphasis on education, unless it's already there, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. But when I look at this, I think two of the big arguments, or questions about this have been: does the city have a right to be involved in this? And it's something the mayor addressed. And another has to do with whether pre-K is really, should that be the focus, or should the focus be elsewhere if we are going to get involved in this? And personally, I agree with the mayor's premise. I think pre-K is crucial, and I think that it doesn't guarantee success. As you said, a lot depends on what goes on in the home. It doesn't mean that you're going to be successful through high school. But I think if a child enters first grade and they're overwhelmed because they're not prepared, I think I've personally seen a lot of cases where it just spirals from there. So I agree with the premise. The questions that I have, and I think that voters are going to have to look at, are is this the right approach? Should the city have gone all in and in this way, or should they have taken a more modest approach and try to help existing agencies? And that's I think one of the things that's going to have to be answered.
Ray Saldana, what about this? The mayor said if there wasn't the 8th cent availability, there wouldn't have been the money to do this. We wouldn't be having this discussion right now. A lot of callers are suspicious that the tail wagged the dog here, that there was available tax cap money, it was burning a hole in the pockets of politicians, and they were going to do something with it, and this is what they've decided to do.
Well, I don't think that the mayor would doubt that he is a big proponent of doing something about the root of what San Antonio has been seen as being the lagging city with respect to education. I think we know that there's a gap there, whether that was through, what was being voiced during the SA 2020 meetings, or what is being voiced in a respect that we see it in community meetings, in our own town halls, where we sit with neighbor association. They say, you guys are taking care of the small things. You're cleaning graffiti. You're doing things that I think are reactive, but how about we get to the root of some of these problems? And it really just devolves into a conversation of what are we doing about education? And for a long time, our automatic response was that, that's the job of the schools and we can't get involved in that. But I think we're going beyond that. We're really removing barn doors from ourselves, and we're saying, this is how we want to invest. And I think, to answer your question, on the 1/8 cent, it wasn't the case that I think that the mayor was looking to do this without this mechanism. I knew that he had a sort of a big mission in his term to get something like this done that was going to get at the root of what San Antonio has seen as being a problem, and he knew that this was a mechanism that was going to ultimately put it to the vote of our entire residents. So this is a good opportunity for not us as policymakers to make the decision, but for a resident to understand, look at the school, look at the state of some of the dropout rates that we've seen in the city. What do you think will have and what do you think will have an impact for the student or your neighbor that or for your 4-year-old, and how can we do it in the smartest way possible?
But the question was, would we be having the discussion if the 8th cent wasn't there? We wouldn't be, right?
Sure. No, I don't think we would. I mean, I think that's pretty clear.
So, is there room for, or can you imagine that there would be further city interest in the education of our kids, or is this as far as the city will get involved? Because again, sooner or later, school districts are going to push back and say, what are we here for if you're setting the goals and you're establishing the benchmarks, right?
Well, I mean, the schools are there from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., and we know that that's not the entire lifetime of a child. We know that what happens before school is important just as well as what happens after school. And so if you look at the entire lifespan of a kid, you'll know that we have a stake in the interest of what happens, whether they are developing as positive role models or whether they're developing intellectually. We know that that's our responsibility as well, whether that's because they're walking down walkable sidewalks or whether we're
but see, that's something that a school district can't do anything about,
Sure.
and you can.
That's right.
Whereas some people are saying this would seem to be overlaying or duplicating existing elected bodies.
I mean, and what we've been doing, I think, to try to approach this problem from the city's perspective has been pretty piecemeal. I'll admit that, we've gone after school challenge program in the early 90s. We've funded great programs like the Alamo Academies.
Wonderful.
But I think, what we've said is, and what the research has told us in this year task force, is that the place that you focus resources that are limited is the area that you get the highest return on investment. And this is a Nobel-winning economist, James Heckman, who is telling you that if you're going to be a policymaker and you're going to focus in on any part of a student's life, it needs to be at the beginning. I don't think we'll argue about that. I think we think the same thing about our 4-year-olds. And we're just saying that we want to be smart as policymakers. This is not a guessing game at this point with so much ample evidence available. We know that the highest return on investment is early, and we're not going to no longer do it piecemeal in the direction that we're helping schools, and I think the schools appreciate the helping hand.
All right, we're going to talk more about this on Gang of Four. Your phone calls welcome on it at 599-5555, plus some of the other things that made news this week. But first, 1041 on 550 KTSA. Four is back. It's the lightning round where we wrap things up and take some quick hits on the news of the week. On our gang today, Doug Vair, Ray Saldana, and Gilbert Garcia. And since we were talking so much about the that attack ad on Romney, we got to acknowledge the worst ever political operative spin came from a woman named Andrea Saul. She's on television doing the "We are shocked at this ad," and she brings up the one thing that Mitt Romney's campaign does not want brought up. Listen to this. Yeah, there you go. I'm afraid I can't argue with you anymore now. All right, or maybe pre-K for her. I don't know, one of those two. Well, you know, one of the interesting sort of side stories to these Olympic Games in London, which have become some of the most watched Olympic Games in modern history on television, we've had a number of athletes booted for marijuana being detected in their system, yet the most decorated athlete at these Olympic Games, Michael Phelps, is a known user of marijuana who was photographed with a bong.
Yeah.
Here's my question. Why does marijuana get you thrown out of competitive sports when nobody believes it gives you an advantage or enhances your performance?
Makes you stupid.
Well, people use it to unwind and relax. It's a recreational drug. I mean, it doesn't sound like the thing I would choose to do if I was, you know, having this once-in-a-lifetime moment to run a race or whatever, but why is this somehow something that should be against the rules?
If it's California, it probably wouldn't be. You know?
I mean, shouldn't the only drugs that they boot you for be drugs that either enhance your performance or conditioning? I mean, you're a runner, Ray. I mean, what about this?
Well, I mean, they clearly just established rules, whether they made sense or not. You should just at least abide by them in the time period they say you could not do them. What you do outside of that...
Well, I agree. They should know better because it is a rule. I mean, I'm questioning, why is it a rule?
I mean, it's, I guess to the point of it actually hampers, it makes you slower, it's illogical, why would you even, you know, make that a rule? I couldn't answer
It
that.
relaxes you enough to be able to, well, yeah, it makes no sense.
All right, so we agree on that.
Yeah.
There was a study that came out, I guess it actually came out in 2009, but it was just reported this week by Money Magazine. And what it says is that when you look at so-called definitions of poverty, and then you look at the way people actually live, 62% of households earning less than $20,000 a year own between 2 and 4 televisions, and a third of them own an LCD or plasma screen TV. 68% of the richest households own 2 or 4 televisions. So 68% of the richest, 62% of the poorest. And then the article goes on to point out that a majority of the poorest households now have things like central air and microwaves. They have more living space than quote-unquote average or middle-income households in Europe do, in Asia, for example. So the headline was, "Are you poor if you have a flat-screen TV?" Are you?
Well, I think people's priorities have changed. I sense, and I think that we've seen this with the way the government has sort of spent beyond its means over the last 30, 40 years. I mean, I think sometimes people tend to be in denial about maybe the situation they're in and maybe spend beyond their means. And I think that's why you have a lot of people in debt. And I think that's kind of a chronic problem in the country.
Is poverty now as much a function, maybe even more a function of choices as opposed to income? Because, I mean, if you are able to get 2 TVs, and by the way, they also said that a majority of these households have an Xbox or PlayStation but don't have a computer, Ray. I mean, boy, if you're trying to get up, move up in the world and improve yourself, you could do more for yourself with a computer than you could with a game station.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I don't know if I agree with the study because I don't think that that a number of television sets is a proxy for your. I think a better proxy would be. I read studies of managing wealth. So the claim is that not a lot of savings goes into either your mortgage or to your savings account, and so that's the better proxy than the amount of TVs. I guess.
Well, I'm not obsessing on the number of TVs, but you had to choose to buy them, and you've tied up disposable income in them, and wouldn't you be able to do something that improved your lifestyle better?
I think that the TVs actually contribute to poverty, obesity, diabetes, because if you're sitting there watching TV, look at how you're bombarded with cash call loans, all kinds of terrible junk food to eat. I mean, it's just, you're bombarded with all these images, and that actually motivates people to go out and do these things that they shouldn't be doing.
People should listen to radio. It's much better.
Oh, it's much better for you, absolutely. So I think that television actually contributes to this. I don't know if it's an indicator or not, but I think it actually does.
And I don't think they're buying it in lump sums of balloon payments of $1,500, and so they're paying slowly, and maybe that makes it more manageable.
But you know, to this point as well, most folks know I was born here in San Antonio. I went to school in Laredo, and in the 60s, in Laredo, I'm a product of the public school system down there. In the 60s, Laredo was the poorest city in the entire country. Yet we had no breakfast program, we had no free lunches, and everybody that I went to school with, and there were a lot of poor people down there, everybody had enough to bring something to eat for breakfast or something to eat for lunch. We had none of these programs, and I don't think the folks were any worse off back then than they are today.
So, in some ways, do well-intentioned programs to help people sometimes freeze people in place?
Absolutely, I think that's true.
A lot of great pictures from this Curiosity probe NASA sent up to Mars. I mean, it's really amazing. And I look at these things, I can't stop looking. It's just, I don't know what I think I'm going to see, but it's fascinating. Is it worth $3 billion?
I don't know how much they'll end up getting. That'll be scientifically beneficial. I mean, I just think it's a fantastic thing. I've always just been a fan of the space program. And those, as you say, those pictures. I mean, it's almost like looking at Arizona or something. Like when you see the mountainous areas, it's.
Of course, the conspiracy theorists would say it is.
Yeah, that's. But I do believe that there are so many different factors. I think the inspirational factor that the Apollo program provided is something that's really hard to quantify, and I think that's
making
missing.
us think beyond our own planet.
And giving people,
What's
kids,
possible.
some sense that this is a possibility for them.
Okay.
And so I think there are a lot of different.
But the work was not done by NASA. Most of the work was done by private contractors.
Right. Well, because the NASA budget got slashed by the same president that then tweeted a congratulations to NASA for this mission. By the way, calling it Curiosity, I was a little disappointed. Remember back in the day when they had like very aggressive names, Explorer and Viking, and I don't know, Curiosity is just sort of seems very tentative. Like we're not really sure. We don't want to bother your little planet here. Yeah, we're just curious. We're not just stopping by. All right. Survey reported this week says that the more under stress a man is, the more likely he wants a woman with some flesh on her frame, some curves. That when they studied the responses of two groups of men, different groups of men. This was a study done in Britain. When they correlated how much stress the men were under in their lives, worried about jobs, money, whatever, it turned out that those men responded more favorably to images of curvy, sort of Marilyn Monroe-looking women, as opposed to skinny, supermodel-looking women. So why, when we're under pressure, men, do we want curvy?
I imagine maybe it's a.
It's a fast Ray answer.
No,
Whoa!
no. I mean, I read that article, but I thought it was pretty illogical. I followed some studies that I did a little sociological research while I was in college, but some of these things where you correlate the feelings of men as opposed to what they saw on a piece of paper or a picture. I just don't buy it here in this case.
In other words, it could be random, and
Yeah.
you're trying to explain it.
Do you want a piece of prime rib or do you want flank steak?
Well, they call it
Cushion
environmental
women?
security. They say that when men are under pressure and stress, women who have more weight look like they are more able to handle the threats and the threatening environment around them. So we're looking for a woman that can, we can sort of hide behind, I guess. Throws a big shade. I don't know.
We all want Candy Crowley as our...
Candy Crowley.
I'm not under that much pressure, Doug.
Oh, Candy Crowley reference.
I guess things would have to get a little worse for me.
Didn't see that one coming.
Yeah.
In this same vein, I guess, Ray, this is another one of those studies, but They did some research in Canada, and they found that you can identify gender orientation, gender preference in a man by dilation of the pupils. Gay men have the same pupil dilation as straight women when they look at sexy pictures of men, and vice versa. So instead of just asking people what their gender preference is, I guess we should be measuring their pupils. It's just very awkward when you're at a bar to go up to somebody and measure their pupils without them knowing.
I guess the verdict is in then. It is not a conscious choice.
It's up to your pupil size, yeah.
That's right.
Don't blame me, blame my pupils. A guy in Oregon is going to do 30 days in jail. Have you heard this? His crime was collecting rainwater and snow runoff on his property. It's against the law, and it has been since 1925, of having what they call illegal reservoirs on your property. So he had barrels under his gutters and what have you. Like a lot, I see people in San Antonio do that. I don't know if it's legal or not here. We should find out, right? Illegal reservoirs?
You go to South Texas, you go from here to Pearsall to Cotulla down to
private
Laredo.
ranches.
Every ranch has a metal roof with runoff going into a barrel.
Not in Oregon. What, I mean, you just wonder, not only at the law, but at the person who looked it up and said, let's go get this guy.
Who has to enforce it?
Right, yeah, exactly. We're here to arrest you today
Yeah.
for your illegal reservoir.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable. That's somebody who needs himself a curvy woman, I think. All right, Doug Vair, congratulations on all the good news at Retama
Yeah,
Park. We hope it
everything's
continues.
great. Thank you.
It's good to have you on Gang of Four. Councilman Ray Saldana, great job today.
Pleasure to
Having
be
you
here. I'm glad I was here.
I hope you'll do this again for us.
Absolutely.
Love to have you back. And Gilbert Garcia, would love to read your stuff at PlazaTheArmasTX.com. And if you are a political junkie, you should get Reagan's Comeback, the book that Gilbert wrote about the 1976 Republican primary in Texas. Fascinating stuff, and maybe, who knows, maybe history will repeat itself. It's about Texas being essentially a one-party state,
That's right.
and how that changed. Well, if you're a frustrated Democrat, I guess you could read this book and say, hey, maybe someday.
Take some hope.
Yeah, it only takes 40 years. All right, it's 11:42 on 550 KTSA.